Most people think the modern world is shaped by visible power. Governments, elections, laws, public debates. But those things sit on top of something much quieter. There is an invisible layer of the modern world, made of standards, protocols, systems, and infrastructure, that doesn't tell you what to think or what to believe. It simply decides what is possible. You never voted for it. You rarely see it. And yet almost everything in your life depends on it working. This video is not about conspiracies. It's about the systems that shape reality precisely because they don't need your attention. The world you see versus the world that runs. Most people believe they live inside a world shaped by visible decisions. Governments pass laws. Politicians argue. Elections happen. Corporations make announcements. Crises dominate the news cycle. This visible layer creates the impression that reality is driven by people making conscious choices in public. But this is only the surface. Beneath it exists another layer that rarely appears in headlines and almost never becomes the subject of public debate, yet it determines how the visible world is allowed to function. This deeper layer is not secret, but it is largely unseen. It consists of standards, protocols, infrastructure, classification systems, and operational rules that define what actions are technically, legally, or economically possible before any political or cultural decision is made. It does not decide what society should want. It decides what society can do. For example, before a government can choose a policy, it must operate within existing financial systems, regulatory frameworks, data standards, and risk models. Before a company can decide to act, it must comply with accounting rules, reporting requirements, software architectures, and supply chain constraints. Before an individual can meaningfully participate, their actions must fit into platforms, interfaces, and identification systems they did not design. This invisible layer does not argue. It does not persuade. It does not demand belief. It simply enforces structure. If something does not fit the structure, it is not debated, it is rejected as impossible, inefficient, non-compliant, or unsafe. What makes this layer so powerful is that it operates before ideology. Political disagreements happen inside boundaries that are already fixed. Cultural conflicts play out on top of systems that quietly define the rules of engagement. By the time people argue about values, the space of possible outcomes has already been narrowed. Most people never encounter this layer directly because it is designed to disappear into normality. Standards feel neutral. Protocols feel technical. Infrastructure feels boring. Yet these are precisely the mechanisms that shape reality at scale. They decide how money moves, how information is ranked, how risk is calculated, how identity is verified, and how responsibility is distributed. This creates a fundamental illusion about power. We tend to associate power with visibility, speeches, authority figures, dramatic decisions. But the most consequential power in the modern world often operates without visibility. It does not need public legitimacy because it does not ask for permission. It simply defines the operating environment. When this layer works smoothly, it is almost invisible. When it fails, everything else fails with it. Markets freeze. Services collapse. Communication breaks. Yet even in failure, attention usually focuses on surface-level actors rather than the underlying structures that made the failure possible. This is why people often feel that the world is out of control, even when institutions appear intact. The visible layer continues to function, governments meet, companies operate, media cycles repeat, but the deeper layer increasingly feels rigid, opaque, and unresponsive. Decisions seem constrained in ways that no one fully explains. Understanding this distinction between the world you see and the world that actually runs things is essential. Without it, modern power appears chaotic or conspiratorial. With it, power appears structural. Not hidden by intent, but hidden by complexity. The invisible layer is not a group of people. It is a condition. It is the accumulated result of systems designed to scale, optimize, and stabilize, gradually becoming the environment in which all other decisions take place. This is the layer we live inside, whether we recognize it or not. And it is the layer that defines the real limits of choice in the modern world. What the invisible layer actually is. When people hear about an invisible layer, they often imagine something abstract or conspiratorial. In reality, this layer is made of things almost everyone interacts with every day, usually without thinking about them as power at all. These systems are familiar, boring, and technical, which is exactly why they are so influential. Take financial infrastructure. Most people think money is controlled by governments or central banks. In practice, money moves through standardized systems like payment networks, settlement protocols, accounting standards, and compliance frameworks. Whether you can send money, receive it, freeze it, reverse it, or report it depends less on political decisions and more on how these systems are designed. If your transaction does not fit the format, it simply does not exist. No debate, no appeal. Consider credit scores. For millions of people, access to housing, loans, jobs, or even basic services is not decided by a human judgment, but by a numerical model. These models are built using standardized assumptions about risk, behavior, and reliability. You cannot argue with a credit score. You cannot explain context to it. It does not care why something happened. It only evaluates whether you fit the predefined pattern. This is power that operates silently, continuously, and impersonally. Now look at digital platforms. Search engines, recommendation systems, and social media feeds shape what information people see, what topics feel important, and what ideas appear normal. Most users believe they are freely choosing content. In reality, their choices are filtered through ranking algorithms, moderation rules, and engagement metrics designed to optimize specific outcomes. These systems do not tell you what to think. They decide what you encounter first, what is buried, and what is never shown at all. Another example is standards and protocols. Internet communication works because of agreed technical rules, data formats, encryption standards, routing protocols. These rules are not voted on by the public. Yet without them, modern life stops instantly. You cannot opt out of them. You can only comply. If your software, device, or data does not conform, it simply does not function. Even identity itself is increasingly mediated by invisible systems. Verification processes, databases, risk flags, and automated checks determine whether you are recognized as legitimate. You may exist physically, but if the system does not recognize you digitally, your ability to act is severely limited. Again, there is no villain here. Only procedures. What all these examples share is a common trait: they do not make moral judgments. They make structural ones. They do not ask whether something is right or wrong. They ask whether it fits. And if it does not fit, the result is exclusion rather than punishment. This is why these systems feel neutral. They present themselves as technical necessities rather than choices. But neutrality is precisely where their power lies. Once something is framed as infrastructure, it stops being questioned. It becomes background reality. Most people never think of accounting rules, data standards, risk models, or protocols as political. Yet these systems quietly shape what kinds of businesses can exist, what kinds of lives are viable, and what kinds of decisions are feasible. By the time public debate begins, the most important constraints are already in place. The invisible layer is not hidden because someone wants it hidden. It is invisible because it is embedded. It is the operating system of the modern world. And like any operating system, you only notice it when something breaks, or when you realize you were never allowed to change it in the first place. Power that doesn't need attention. Most people instinctively associate power with visibility. They look for it in speeches, leaders, elections, scandals, and conflicts. Power, in this view, is something that must constantly justify itself, explain its actions, and compete for legitimacy. But the most stable form of power in the modern world works in the opposite way. It does not need attention at all. Visible power is fragile. Governments change. Leaders lose credibility. Public opinion shifts. Every visible authority must continuously defend itself against criticism, resistance, and loss of trust. Invisible power does not face this problem because it does not present itself as authority in the first place. It presents itself as necessity. Infrastructure does not argue. Standards do not campaign. Protocols do not explain themselves. They simply exist as conditions that must be satisfied in order to act. If you want to participate, you adapt. If you do not adapt, you are excluded. This makes attention irrelevant. Whether people like the system or not does not affect its operation. A clear example is software dependency. Entire industries depend on specific operating systems, programming languages, cloud platforms, and APIs. No one votes on these choices. Yet once they are widely adopted, changing them becomes nearly impossible. The cost of exit is higher than the cost of compliance. Power emerges not from coercion, but from indispensability. The same applies to financial infrastructure. Clearing systems, settlement networks, and compliance frameworks operate quietly in the background. They do not need public approval because without them, transactions cannot happen. A company can disagree politically with the system and still depend on it completely to function. This form of power is resilient because it bypasses ideology. You do not need to convince people that the system is good. You only need to make it necessary. Once a system becomes necessary, resistance turns into negotiation, and negotiation turns into adaptation. Opposition is absorbed rather than confronted. Attention, in this context, becomes a liability rather than an asset. The more visible a system is, the more likely it is to be challenged. The most effective structures therefore aim for boring reliability. They hide behind technical language, operational necessity, and claims of neutrality. This is why debates about power often miss their target. People argue about leaders, policies, and cultural symbols, while the underlying systems remain untouched. The real constraints are not enforced by force, but by compatibility. If something is incompatible with the system, it simply does not scale. Another important feature of attentionless power is that it distributes responsibility so widely that accountability becomes impossible. No single person controls the system. No single decision defines it. It evolves through incremental updates, patches, and optimizations. Each change seems minor. Together, they shape reality. Because this power does not announce itself, it is rarely experienced as oppression. It is experienced as frustration, limitation, or inevitability. People feel blocked, filtered, or constrained, but struggle to identify a source. This ambiguity prevents direct resistance. Power that does not need attention also does not need legitimacy in the traditional sense. It does not ask to be believed. It asks to be used. And once used widely enough, it becomes indispensable. This is why invisible systems outlast visible authorities. Leaders come and go. Institutions reform. But infrastructure persists. It shapes the world quietly, precisely because it never demands recognition. Understanding this shift is crucial. Modern power does not dominate by commanding behavior. It dominates by defining the environment in which behavior occurs. And environments, once established, are far harder to challenge than decisions. Why no one feels responsible? One of the most confusing features of the modern world is the absence of a clear decision maker. Things happen that affect millions of people, yet when something goes wrong, there is no obvious person to point to. This is not an accident and not a failure of ethics. It is a structural consequence of how the invisible layer is built. In systems based on infrastructure, standards, and protocols, responsibility is fragmented by design. No single actor controls the whole system. Each participant manages a narrow slice. One team maintains a standard, another enforces compliance, another builds tools on top of it, another optimizes performance metrics. Everyone is doing their job. No one feels like they are making the decision. Consider automated systems. A loan is denied, content is removed, an account is flagged, a transaction is frozen. From the user's perspective, this feels like a deliberate act. From inside the system, it is not. One part of the system applied a rule. Another part evaluated risk. Another part executed the outcome. No human sat down and chose that specific result. It emerged from the interaction of procedures. This is why appeals often fail. There is no person with the authority to override the system without breaking it. Even when humans are involved, they are constrained by predefined frameworks. They are not asked to judge what is fair. They are asked to verify whether criteria were met. Responsibility shifts from moral judgment to procedural correctness. This dynamic also exists at institutional levels. Corporations follow regulations. Regulators follow standards. Standards follow technical committees. Committees follow risk models and legacy constraints. Each layer can truthfully say that it did not originate the outcome. The result is a system where harmful or irrational consequences can occur without anyone feeling personally responsible for them. Importantly, this does not require bad intentions. In fact, it often arises precisely because systems are designed to remove individual bias. Decisions are automated to be consistent. Rules are standardized to be fair. Oversight is distributed to prevent abuse. The unintended result is a structure where accountability dissolves. When responsibility is spread thin enough, it becomes invisible. People stop asking, "Who decided this?" and start asking, "How does the system work?" But understanding how it works does not give you the power to change it. It only explains why nothing seems to move. This is why modern systems feel immune to outrage. Anger needs a target. Procedural systems do not provide one. They respond to criticism with explanations rather than apologies. They offer documentation instead of accountability. Over time, this creates a specific psychological effect. People stop expecting responsibility altogether. They assume that outcomes are inevitable, not chosen. This lowers trust, but it also reduces resistance. If no one is responsible, there is nothing to confront. Rome showed the early version of this pattern. Authority moved from people to offices, from judgment to procedure. Modern infrastructure completes that transformation. Power persists without authorship. This is not a conspiracy. It is a design outcome. Systems built to scale and stabilize inevitably trade responsibility for continuity. And once that trade is made, reversing it becomes extremely difficult. Understanding this helps explain why the invisible layer feels so frustrating. It is powerful, but not accountable. Active, but not intentional. Present everywhere, but owned by no one. How this layer shapes reality: the invisible layer does not merely constrain choices. Over time, it actively shapes what people perceive as normal, acceptable, and realistic. This influence is subtle because it operates through defaults rather than commands. People rarely feel forced. They feel guided, filtered, and nudged into patterns that gradually harden into reality. One of the most powerful ways this happens is through classification. Systems decide what counts as risk, compliance, success, or failure. These categories are not neutral descriptions of the world, they are operational definitions. Once embedded into software, regulation, or infrastructure, they stop being opinions and start functioning as facts. Take risk assessment. Financial systems classify certain behaviors, profiles, or regions as risky. Insurance models price lives differently based on location, age, and data correlations. Credit systems define reliability numerically. None of these systems claim to describe truth in a moral sense. They describe what is acceptable to the system. Over time, people adapt their behavior to fit these definitions, because fitting the model becomes a condition for participation. Another example is visibility. Algorithms decide what is promoted, what is buried, and what is ignored. This does not require censorship. It only requires ranking. Content that fits the system's metrics becomes more visible. Content that does not quietly disappears. As a result, certain ideas feel ubiquitous while others feel marginal, even if they exist in similar numbers. Reality begins to reflect what the system amplifies. Infrastructure also shapes time. Platforms reward immediacy, responsiveness, and constant availability. Delayed actions are penalized. Long-term processes are deprioritized. This subtly trains people to value speed over depth, reaction over reflection. What feels like a cultural shift is often the result of technical incentives embedded in systems few people ever see. Even language is affected. Systems require inputs in specific formats. Forms reduce complex human situations to checkboxes. Databases flatten nuance into categories. Over time, people learn to describe themselves and their problems in system-compatible terms. What cannot be expressed in the available fields effectively does not exist. Importantly, this shaping effect is cumulative. No single system defines reality on its own. But when financial, technological, bureaucratic, and informational systems align around similar assumptions, they produce a coherent environment. That environment feels natural because it is consistent. People grow up inside it. They adapt to it without noticing the adaptation. This is how infrastructure becomes destiny. Not through force, but through repetition. Not by persuading people of a worldview, but by rewarding certain behaviors and penalizing others until alternatives fade. The most striking aspect of this process is that it feels apolitical. There are no speeches, no campaigns, no declarations. Yet the consequences are deeply political, because they determine who can act, who is trusted, and who is ignored. Power is exercised through configuration rather than command. By the time people argue about values, the material conditions have already been set. Debates happen inside boundaries defined elsewhere. This is why so many modern conflicts feel unresolved. People argue passionately, but nothing structural changes. The invisible layer shapes reality by making some paths frictionless and others nearly impossible. Over time, those paths become what people call the way things are. The system does not need to justify itself. It simply works, and working becomes its own justification. Understanding this helps explain why change feels so difficult. You are not arguing against opinions. You are pushing against environments. And environments do not respond to persuasion. Why it feels impossible to change. At some point, people stop asking why systems are the way they are and start asking why they are so hard to replace. The answer is not lack of will or imagination. It is structural dependence. The invisible layer is difficult to change because it is no longer just a set of tools. It has become the environment in which everything else operates. Once a system reaches sufficient scale, it stops being optional. Financial networks, data standards, software platforms, legal frameworks, and logistical infrastructures become deeply interwoven. Each system relies on others to function. Removing or replacing one element does not create a clean break. It creates cascading failure. This is why even deeply flawed systems persist. The cost of continuation is visible and frustrating, but the cost of replacement is unknown and potentially catastrophic. People tolerate inefficiency because disruption threatens basic functionality. In such conditions, stability becomes more valuable than improvement. Another reason change feels impossible is that responsibility is distributed. There is no single lever to pull. No central authority can redesign the whole system without coordination across countless independent actors. Each participant optimizes locally, protecting their own slice. Systemic reform requires alignment that rarely exists. Legacy plays a crucial role. Systems accumulate history. Decisions made decades ago shape what is possible today. Software depends on outdated architectures. Regulations reference obsolete conditions. Standards persist because too much has been built on top of them. Even when better alternatives exist, migration costs are prohibitive. This creates a powerful form of inertia. The system does not need to defend itself ideologically. It only needs to be embedded deeply enough that removing it feels reckless. Criticism is allowed. Reform is discussed. But execution stalls because no one wants to be responsible for breaking what still, mostly works. Change is further complicated by risk management. Large systems are designed to minimize uncertainty. Radical change introduces unknowns. Unknowns threaten stability metrics. As a result, innovation is confined to safe zones, incremental updates, patches, and extensions that preserve compatibility with the existing structure. Over time, this produces a paradox. The system becomes simultaneously fragile and rigid. Fragile because it relies on tightly coupled components. Rigid because decoupling them would cause failure. This fragility encourages caution, and caution reinforces rigidity. People inside such systems often sense that something is wrong, but they experience it as exhaustion rather than crisis. There is no dramatic moment that justifies radical action. Instead, there is a constant background pressure that never quite becomes unbearable. Rome demonstrated this pattern early. Modern infrastructure completes it. Systems persist not because they are optimal, but because they are too interconnected to abandon. The invisible layer survives by making itself indispensable. This is why meaningful change feels out of reach. You are not pushing against a decision. You are pushing against accumulated structure. And accumulated structure does not respond to urgency. It responds only to failure, and by the time failure is undeniable, options are limited. Living inside something you never chose. One of the most difficult aspects of the invisible layer is not its power, but its inevitability. Most people did not choose the systems that shape their lives. They were born into them. By the time they became aware of how the world works, the rules were already in place. Participation was not presented as a decision, but as a condition of normal life. This creates a specific psychological tension. On one hand, people are told they are free, autonomous, and responsible for their outcomes. On the other hand, the range of viable choices is quietly constrained by systems they do not control and often cannot even see. Success becomes a matter of navigating frameworks rather than expressing intention. Over time, this changes how people think about agency. Instead of asking, "What do I want to do?" they ask, "What is allowed? What is optimized? Or, what fits?" Ambition adapts to structure. Creativity is redirected toward compatibility. People become skilled at operating systems rather than questioning them. This does not feel like oppression. It feels like realism. People learn the rules, adjust expectations, and move on. Those who adapt are rewarded. Those who do not are filtered out, not through punishment, but through friction. Doors simply fail to open. Opportunities quietly disappear. Living inside an invisible system also reshapes identity. Individuals start describing themselves in system-friendly terms: metrics, profiles, scores, roles, credentials. Complexity is flattened to what can be processed. Parts of human experience that do not translate into data become harder to communicate, and eventually harder to justify. Another consequence is quiet resignation. Because no single actor appears responsible, frustration has nowhere to go. Complaints feel pointless. Resistance feels abstract. People sense constraint but struggle to name its source. This produces disengagement rather than revolt. Yet life continues. People build careers, relationships, and meaning inside these constraints. They are not passive victims. They are adaptive participants. This is what makes the invisible layer so stable. It does not require belief. It only requires adjustment. The danger is not that people are controlled, but that control becomes indistinguishable from normality. When systems define the environment, their limits feel like facts of nature rather than human decisions. Choice narrows quietly, without confrontation. Understanding this does not offer an easy solution. There is no lever to pull and no villain to defeat. But it does offer clarity. It explains why modern life often feels constrained without feeling tyrannical, managed without feeling guided, and complex without feeling purposeful. Living inside something you never chose is not a failure of character. It is a condition of scale. Recognizing that condition does not free you from it, but it allows you to see the boundaries more clearly. And seeing boundaries is the first step toward understanding where, if anywhere, real agency still exists. Seeing the system without pretending to escape it. The purpose of understanding the invisible layer is not to imagine an escape from it. There is no clean outside. These systems are not cages built by villains. They are environments built by accumulation. They exist because they work, not well, not fairly, but reliably enough to persist. What matters is not exposure, but clarity. Once you recognize that much of modern power operates through infrastructure rather than decisions, frustration becomes easier to interpret. Limits stop feeling personal. Stagnation stops feeling accidental. You begin to see where choices end and where structure begins. This perspective does not restore control. It restores orientation. It explains why so many efforts at change feel like they disappear into nothing, and why debate so often fails to touch what actually matters. Arguments happen at the surface. Reality is shaped underneath. The invisible layer does not respond to outrage or persuasion. It responds to failure, incompatibility, and replacement. all of which are slow, costly, and uncertain. That is why it outlasts crises, ideologies, and leaders. It simply waits. Living inside such a system requires a different kind of awareness. Not constant resistance, but discernment. Knowing when you are making a choice, and when you are navigating a constraint. Knowing which battles are symbolic, and which ones are structural. The danger is not that these systems exist. The danger is that they disappear from thought entirely. When infrastructure becomes invisible, it becomes unquestionable. When it becomes unquestionable, it defines reality by default. Seeing the system does not free you from it, but it prevents you from mistaking it for nature. And in a world increasingly shaped by things that do not ask for your attention, that distinction matters more than ever.